Atlanta, Georgia, but he's up visiting his brother, so aren't we lucky that we could have him drive over for a two-part series. The Sunday presentation is on our YouTube page. If you haven't seen it, it is awesome. I encourage you to go see it. It's a different presentation than today on a slightly different topic, but related. Today, we have Mark. He is the CEO of Ecclesia, which is an organization that helps pastors cultivate Sabbath practices. I'm calling it slightly wrong, but cultivate Sabbath practices. I'd like to see that, please. And also to think creatively about new ways of being and doing church. He happens to have a lot of other expertise, and his number one call to fame is that he is Dave and Brenton Sanders' good friend from Atlanta. So it's so nice to have these connections, Mark, and I know that you've been here to work with our staff in the past, which we so appreciated. And now he's here to talk with us about Gone for Good, and I hope it's not gone for good, but we're glad to hear this. Come on up.
Thank you. Bill? Oh, I'm on. All right, let me get this light on so I can see my notes. Thank you, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Sunday was amazing. Just really enjoyed all the exchanges that I had with so many of you. And I'm honored and humbled to be asked, even after that, to come back again and speak to you. Is Downs in the room? Downs, are you the one that asked me about St. John's? Or is that somebody else? Must have been someone else that looks like you. So never mind. Somebody asked me about St. John's Church in, I think, Collegeville, Minnesota. Did I know about it? It's made of cement, and it was a French architect. It turns out it is Marcel Breuer, who's the same architect that did St. Francis de Sales that we looked at on Sunday, with some similar details. So if you want to go hunting on the web sometime for another really cool cement church, St. John's in, I think, Collegeville, Minnesota. Thank you again for your warm welcome. It's wonderful to be here. I think maybe I'm going to need to move here because the things you're doing as a group sound like a lot of fun. I'll sign up for all of that. The title of this presentation is Gone for Good, but I want you to note the question mark behind it. So it's actually a play on words, and it's taken from a title of a book by a Presbyterian pastor named Mark Elsdon, who documents through a series of really fine essays written by different movers and shakers in the theological world about what's happening with the decline of the church. So this is not going to be a real happy-go-lucky kind of talk, but we are resurrection people, and it will end on an up note. But we're going to look at some of the daunting details about the decline of the church. We're going to look them right in the eye. And I'm going to actually talk with you, and I'm really eager to hear some of your feedback afterwards, if we can take a little time for that, about what you think about what I'm saying. And it's a bit counterintuitive, because I'm going to suggest that place may actually make a difference in helping us to stem the tide of the decline of the church. And I use an expression that I borrowed from another group that I'll tell you about in a few minutes, redemptive placemaking. What does that look like? So it builds on my career was in workplace strategy and experience design, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'll show you some of the analogies between the work I did there and some of my thinking about what we might be able to do with churches in terms of using place strategically when it comes to liturgical practices, return to church, all those kinds of things. So that's the roadmap for where we're going. Remember the question mark. And his play on words really is that, are the churches gone for good? Or are the ones that are already gone, did it end up being for good, for the greater good, for the common good? So that's the play on words here, if that makes sense. I better turn on my little thing here. All right. We have 15 Easters left. What does that mean? Ed Stetzer is a theologian who is a professor. He's the dean of the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And back in 2017, he wrote an article for the Washington Post, back in 2017. And the title of the article was, "Unless the mainline Protestant church does something to stand in the breach, we have 27 Easters left." Now we're to 15. I'll do the math for you. That is 2030. That's only 5 years from now. What is the reason for this slightly exaggerated prediction? It's when the church attendance, which is going down and down and down. I think the average church attendance now in the United States is twice a year or something like that. It's quite sobering. When that line, these two spiraling downward lines, crosses with denominational membership or denominational affiliation, which is also fading really fast, when those two come together, that's when he's predicting the end of the church. Well, it's only the end of the church as we know it, but it is still a very daunting possibility, correct? So let's look at a few of the details around some of this. About 15,000 churches in the United States a year are closing. So we really are looking at as many as 80,000 churches closing by the year 2040. It's roughly 1 in 4 churches in the United States. And by 2070, according to a Pew Research, the United States population, only 50% of them will call themselves Christian or claim the name Christian. As opposed to, who knows what it was, let's say during the 40s, it was probably closer to almost 100%, right? And so we're looking at some pretty sobering changes and realities around church. Here's a quote from Mark Elsdon. He's the guy that put this book together, Gone for Good. He says, "We are long past the days of revitalizing every church in order to keep all churches open and operating buildings that are too large or needing renovation." Any of that sound familiar? Many church properties are going to become something different on a massive scale. Whether we like it or not, the wave is upon us. In an article for Slate magazine, an author named Herney Graybar put it this way: America's aging houses of worship face a stark choice: sell, redevelop, or pray for a miracle. So let me show you, and these are my sources. Let's start with that slide. So there's Gone for Good, Mark Elsdon's book on the left. Just up above that to the right is Living into Community by Christine Pohl. If any of you are in a book study or need a book for a book study, this is a phenomenal book. I'm in a study right now with 2 pastors online. We're reading this book. The subtitle is Cultivating Practices That Sustain Us. This is about Christian community. So I'm going to highlight some of the core practices of Christian community, according to Christine Pohl, as another way to possibly revitalize churches that are at the margins. Below that is Phyllis Tickle's book, 2008, but incredibly prescient, called The Great Emergence. And this is all about radical change in church in Western society. I'll do a little spoiler alert. We'll talk about this again a little bit later. But one of her famous quotes is, every 500 years, the church holds a giant rummage sale. And that's where we are. It's been 500 years since John Calvin and John Knox and Zwingli and company and Luther. And so we're in the midst of it, which she's calling it the Great Emergence, a new church immersion. And then next to that is the cover of a toolkit, a wonderful toolkit from an organization called the Proximity Project. And it's called redemptive placemaking. Remember, I used that expression a little bit earlier. I ordered my own toolkit. It was only $25. You can go online and get it. It's a wonderful book about ways that churches can re-engage their community. It talks a lot about churches being more than just spiritual presentations or presences in a neighborhood. They're also cultural. And so every time a church closes, it's a radical change for a neighborhood. And so there's some lovely ideas that we'll talk about from them about ways to engage your community redemptively. And I think with your location, there might be some ideas that appeal to you as well, would appeal to you as well. And then finally, this incredible book called The Great De-Churching. Who's leaving, why are they going, and what will it take to get them back? It's an amazing book. It's written by 2 pastors and a political scientist who did all the research. The research is phenomenal. It's very empirical and again, very daunting. And we'll talk a little bit about who's leaving and why. Sound good? So that's the roadmap for what we're going to talk about today. Let me just say again at the outset that because we are resurrection people, we are not without hope. So please don't get too depressed about these details. But the data is daunting. So in our discussion today, we're going to explore some of the realities around this. Here's a little anecdotal information about the emerging church. And again, here's Phyllis Tickle's really wonderful quote. Every 500 years, the church is compelled to hold a giant rummage sale. And we are living in the midst of one of those 500-year sales. Here's a wonderful quote from Nadia Bowles-Weber. Maybe you know her, this incredible Lutheran pastor who is so insightful and a little iconoclastic. She says, "Church isn't perfect, it's practice." I absolutely love that line. We have to keep reminding ourselves that the church is a human institution, right? And then finally, as we keep going here, a quote from a Methodist pastor. He's actually a pastor of Christ Methodist Church in Manhattan. He's senior pastor. He says, "From out of the ensuing rubble of pre-pandemic church systems arises a once in a generation, or better even than that, a once every 500 years opportunity to re-articulate what it means to follow after the way of Jesus in the 21st century and beyond." So that's a bit of a roadmap for where we're hoping to go here. So let's look at some of the macro trends of the emergent church. This to me is really, really interesting. Well, here's the questions we're going to look at. Who is leaving the church and why? What are the hallmarks of Christian community? Why should we gather? This is a really important question, and one that I think we need to consider as churches start to close. The role of sacred place in gathering the faithful for community and in community. And then finally, what now? Redemptive placemaking, making a starter kit of ideas. So 3 big reasons for this change we're in the middle of right now. This comes from the Great Dechurching book. I find this very interesting. So the first reason, and you see up there, America equals Christianity. That's why I put that picture up there of the American flag and the Christian flag, which unfortunately looks like a lot of chancels in American churches, right? Put our flags up front. Hopefully most of them have been removed, but they don't belong as a symbol of the means of grace in the front of the church, I would argue. But during the Cold War, according to the authors of this book, the terms American and Christian were often used synonymously in our struggle against a nation that posed a threat to America's way of life. I don't know if that sounds familiar. During this period, we added "In God We Trust" to our currency, and we added "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. When the Soviet Union collapsed and the struggle ended, it became more culturally accepted to be both American and non-Christian. I just find that really interesting that the Cold War had an impact on all of this. Here's the second big reason, and it's related because it's also political in nature. And this is not a political statement. I'm just objectively reviewing what happened during the 1990s. Well, maybe not entirely objectively, but I'll do my best. There was fallout from an increasingly polarized religious right. You remember the 1990s. Under the influence of Jerry Falwell's moral majority, Pat Robertson's challenge to George Bush and the GOP, Newt Gingrich's uncompromising takeover of the House, Americans in the middle began to associate Christianity exclusively with these movements and began to let go of all of it. The formerly religious middle began to join the ranks of the nones. I don't mean nuns from the Catholic Church, N-O-N-E-S, the nuns, folks that don't ascribe to any religion or any church affiliation. And here's the third reason, I think perhaps the biggest one, and that's the rise of the internet. So I remember, do you, the first time you ever heard the word Google used as a verb? I think it was 1998, and I was standing in my company's showroom in Houston, Texas, and I said, what the heck does it mean to Google something? I had no idea. I didn't even have a laptop at that point, right? Here we are. The influence of the internet played a colossal role, according to this book, in the acceleration of dechurching in America. Beginning in the mid-90s, people could easily and regularly engage in a wide range of worldviews very different from their own, without anybody watching over their shoulder and saying, that's the wrong way to think, that's the wrong way to believe. And so you have this unobstructed access to new ways of thinking. And overall, that reality started to change the way people actually gave people permission to think differently about traditionally held former views. Davis and Graham, the author of the book, this is about who's leaving the church and why, cite 4 distinct group profiles. And let's take a look at those quickly. The first one is cultural Christians. This is 52% of the de-churched evangelicals. Of that group, 1% believe Jesus is the Son of God. So it's a low orthodoxy score group. Many came from biblically and doctrinally shallow expressions of evangelicalism. As Presbyterians, I think we find that particularly interesting. Reasons for leaving, 23% said my friends were not attending, 18% attending was inconvenient. Here's the next group, mainstream evangelicals. Much of that, they have a much higher orthodoxy score than the other groups. They look the most like those who are still in church and attend church. I think I had these up here. Oops, that was the wrong way. Nope, sorry. 23% left because they didn't fit in with the congregation. 22%, I moved to a new community. 34% would return if I found a church I liked. Now those second two to me are really significant when we start talking about the role of place, right? 22% said I left church because I moved to a new community. What role does the place of a church play in attracting someone that's new to the community to church? And then 34%, I would return if I found a church I liked. So what role does place play in making a church more attractive? Here's the third group, ex-evangelicals. I think that's a very clever play on words. These are people that betrayed by the church or American institutions are not working well for them. For instance, marriage, 49% say Police, 41% said corrupt or don't like them. 37% said democracy is not working anymore. And the confidence level in religious institutions hovers at around 25%. That's ex-evangelicals. The fourth group is BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as a separate group. 22%, I struggle to fit in or belong at church. 20%, I found my community online or through work. I would add a fifth group. They're probably mixed in with these other 4, and that's millennials and Generation Z. So Generation Y and Z. And that's everybody born, I think, before 2000. All right? Millennials are now fully in the workplace. Generation Z, born, see if I can get this right, 2000, starting with 2000, sorry. Millennials are 81 to 2000. Generation Z, the digital natives, are 2000 to or after 2000. So the oldest ones are 24 years old now, and so they're in the workforce. 24-year-olds make up almost 18% of the workforce now, so this is a significant group. And as you probably know, millennials, born between 81 and 2000, and these are inexact numbers, but that's typically the ones that are used. There's 80 million of them, just as many of them as there were of us, the baby boomers. So they're a huge group. The challenge now, the American church, and especially evangelicalism, is largely built for the nuclear family. Think about that for a minute. Or those on that track. So who does that leave out? Who does that leave on the margins? Who does that leave on the outside looking in? Other characteristics of millennials, and this actually comes from I did a quick AI search, which are always very interesting, I think. There's a decline in religiosity, but there's also an increase in church attendance, which is, I find, really curious. They are seeking authentic spiritual communities. Research indicates that a growing number of them are attending church, as I just said, weekly, though the reasons for doing so vary very widely. The motivations for church attendance are, I want to be closer to God, I want to learn more about God, I want to experience transcendence, and I have an interest in ancient practices. I've gotten that validated repeatedly by the people that I talk to. Also, seek a spiritual community that is authentic and relevant to their lives. And there's this epidemic of loneliness. You've all maybe seen some reports on that from the former Surgeon General, and that's a whole other topic, right? looking for a church that's not focused on division or condemnation. I don't know if you know Mark DeVries. He's a Presbyterian pastor, was the pastor of New Ministries at First Presbyterian Church in Nashville for a number of years. He's an expert on doing church with young people. He now has a new organization, relatively new, that he calls Ministry Architects. He's the president of Ministry Architects, but he calls himself a permissionary. Oh, I just love that. I'd like to be a permissionary. And what that means is he says that the number one thing that the church owes to millennials, let's call them younger church members, is space to experiment and space to design their own ministries and space to fail. Because that's design thinking methodology, where you don't necessarily assume one best answer, you iterate toward a better answer. That's what's happening in the business world, and he's suggesting the same thing will work if we just give these younger people space to do their own ministry. Don't create a space on your shelf for them and say, if you can fit in here, you're welcome. It's like you, baby boomer, needs to step aside and let young people take over. I think that's a key factor in what it's going to take to move the church forward. Here's I keep showing this slide, it's a little early. Let me just tell you about these pictures a minute. This is Epworth Methodist Church on Borst Street near downtown Savannah. I actually live in Savannah. I was from Atlanta. Now I live in Savannah. This is a wonderful church that's been standing vacant since 2008. And there's been all kinds of traffic issues around this and vacant land and tear downs and terrible noises, and then all of a sudden the whole education wing is gone after being half torn down for 5 years, and it's just been a mess. And now you can see these big barriers up to protect the sidewalk and the building barriers. And on the left up there, you see they're starting to build something new. They're actually townhouses with retail space below. And so they're creating this whole new world, and the church will be, as many churches are becoming, an event space. This little beauty, that by the way is a Methodist church. This is St. Luke's Lutheran Church. This was on the market a year and a half ago for $795,000, and I wanted it real bad. I wanted to move into it. I, A, couldn't talk my wife into it. B, I couldn't probably talk my banker into it. But here it is. It has been bought by some developer and is being made into a VRBO. It's a really cool building, y'all. It's just gorgeous. A little. A vacation rental by owner. Right, sorry, I'm from Savannah. We have 17 million tourists every year, so I speak tourist speak. And this little church was the original church, and it's already been converted. It's this sweet little cottage you can rent. You ought to come see me. You can stay here. So that's what's become of that church. This church is in Pooler, which is a bedroom community of Savannah. Started in 2010. That right here is a little article about Christ Presbyterian Church grows with Pooler. See the date up there? Or maybe you can read it, August 4, 2010. It's already closed. 2022, they closed their doors. It's at the front of a new subdivision. There was a Lutheran church over here, and they were the anchors of the entrance to the subdivision. This has now been sold for, I believe, $2.25 million 3 years ago to a developer, and they've changed the zoning to allow for a commercial space to be here. It's a sad story. It's a beautiful building. It was a very vital church. I don't have all the details about what it was that made it close. I didn't quite get through to my friends at Presbyterian to get that information. So here's our little list again of who's leaving the church. That's the slide I was looking for earlier. Sorry, I had them out of order. And here's some of the things again that we talk about. Millennial turnoffs, inauthenticity, political advocacy, lack of relevance, and lack of engagement. And see, I love that word, engagement, because this whole discussion about place is how we can engage people differently in time and place. We meet God in time and place. We worship God in time and place. It's really difficult for us to do that outside of space. We still inhabit our own bodies, and our bodies are here on earth. And so you can't really get away from a discussion around place very easily. So again, let's look at if there's any hope for all of us. One of the things the authors of this de-churching book do is acknowledge that we are powerless over much of these trends. So let's accept that reality. But we can help people connect their convictions and their lives. The contradictions, double standards, and hypocrisies of many churches must be addressed, they say. And we need engaged parents who listen to their children's questions, who focus on more than just political engagement. Disciple-making churches that offer more than just events and experiences. That's what's needed. The authors ask, if church leaders simply are working to give attenders the best experience with the least amount of sacrifice, then why would they do anything other than drop in virtually? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but we'd like to see more than that. And we need to meet people where they are and engage and affirm their critiques of the church. Here's that slide again. So the 21% of all the people leaving church says because I moved, and 16% said these are the top two percentages. Attending was inconvenient. So we're going to talk about the nature and Christian of Christian community in just a second, but I want to kind of do a transition here with this quote from a pastor who reviewed the book, The Great Dechurching. He said, "The authors call us to embrace our identity as exiles, giving up the comfort and illusion of cultural power in exchange for the advance of the gospel through weakness and depending on the Lord." Those are kind of counterintuitive realities, right? All right, let's move on. The core practices of Christian community, according to Christine Pohl, are gratitude, promise-keeping, truthfulness, and hospitality. This is a very scholarly book, by the way. It's not a how-to book about how to build a church. It's a book about Christian community, and it's really, really fine. Let's go just a little bit deeper in each of these. Gratitude. She says, if we really understand our lives as redeemed by costly grace, then our primary response can only be gratitude. I'll confess to you, I've had to kind of learn in my 71 years how to live life gratefully. It doesn't come naturally to me. It's at the center of the Christian life. In fact, theologian Karl Barth wrote that grace and gratitude belong together like heaven and earth. Grace evokes gratitude like the voice and echo. Gratitude follows grace like thunder follows lightning. If the essence of God is grace, Barth explains, then the essence of human beings as God's people is our gratitude or our thanks. Here's something I learned, and I just love this. The word gratitude comes, and I'm going to butcher this, Sandra, maybe you can help me, from the Latin word gratia, which means grace or graciousness. Similarly, in Greek, grace, which is charis, is it charis? Charis? Charis, and thanksgiving or gratitude, Eucharista, sound familiar? Share the same root. So this is absolutely essential to our understanding of who we are as Christians. The God we worship and serve, she says, is one who has made promises to us. Oh, sorry, I'm already on promise. Hang on a second. I jumped ahead of myself. That's never happened. Promise keeping, Brent. I heard that. Promise keeping. Let's look at promise keeping. This was really interesting because the making and keeping of promises is a huge piece of who we are as Christians in community, but who we are also as humans. We make promises all the time, whether it's repaying a loan or handing someone $1. Whatever it is, everything we do is some kind of promise fulfilled. The God we worship, she says, and serve is one who has made promises to us, lives in a covenantal relationship with us, and is faithful even when we are unfaithful. Promises provide the internal framework for every relationship and every community. They function like the hidden supports in a well-built house. So we start thinking about these frames for how we hold community together in place and time. I think it becomes a very helpful way to assess how are we doing as a church community? How are we doing as a Christian community? The third one is truthfulness. And here she quotes Jesus from John 14, verses 6 and 7, I believe. In claiming to be the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus connects truth with himself and with the path he embodies, exemplifies, and teaches. We live truthfully as we fully embrace the purpose of God, experiencing the Holy Spirit as the Spirit of truth, guiding us into truth, and as we know Jesus, who is full of grace and truth. That's John 14, verse 17. And then the fourth practice is hospitality. I love this one because I belong now, I'm glad you're all sitting down, to a Baptist church in Savannah. I'm a cradle Calvinist. I went to Calvin College. I got married in Calvin Christian Reformed Church. I was a Calvinist cadet, not a Boy Scout. Lived in an apartment on Calvin Street. I could go on. Now my wife and I belong to a progressive Baptist church. The Cooperative Baptist Fellowship is a breakaway from the Southern Baptist Church. Very open and inclusive, I'm happy to say. It's a wonderful church. My church's number one gift, in my opinion, is its ability to offer hospitality. There are 5-generation members of that church who treat me as if I'm the most important thing that's ever happened to this church ever. And it happens week in and week out. It's in their DNA to be a hospitable church. Community in which hospitality is vibrant tap into deep human longings to belong. Remember we talked about didn't fit in, can't find a church, all those reasons that folks aren't going back to church. It's about belonging. It's about engaging. To find a place to share your gifts and be valued. The practice of hospitality reflects a willingness on the part of the community to be open to others and to their insights and to their needs and their contributions. Hospitality is at the very heart of Christian life, drawing from God's grace and reflecting God's graciousness. So those are the 4 categories. So why gather? And we've already hinted at this a little bit, right? What is the role of sacred place in gathering the faithful for community and in community? Well, now, that church looks familiar. The church is still the bride of Christ. Of course, at our house we say, but he married beneath himself. It is. Here's a quote about the church. I just recently completed the study of Revelation. My wife Marilyn taught it at our church, adult Sunday school class. A solid read of Revelation is an excellent antidote to our church malaise, because here we see the exuberant account of Christ, the Alpha and the Omega, Christ who is the everlasting instant. Here we find a God who is worthy of worship. Here we join that great cloud of witnesses in cosmic and endless praise. Here we find great hope. The book of Revelation is just full of hope. In his powerful book, Reverse Thunder, maybe you've read it, Eugene Peterson writes this: Christ is not seen apart from the gathered, listening, praying, believing, worshiping people of whom he is Lord and Savior. It is not possible to have Christ apart from the church, he says in his study of Revelation. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Ignatius of Antioch. By the way, our new cat is named Ignatius. When you meet together, the power of Satan is confounded, and in the face of your corporate faith, his maleficence crumbles. Oh, no pressure there, right? And then we have Cyprian of Carthage. Can you tell I'm married to an art historian and a theologian? Marilyn loves the church fathers. You cannot have God as your father without the church as your mother. Hebrews 10, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day capital D, drawing near. So what's happening to the church? Let's take a look at this. Placemaking plays a significant role in shaping the venue for sharing God's faithfulness and redemption with our neighbors and with future generations. I think that's an inarguable fact. Crafting places, maybe not literal buildings, but crafting places that cultivate stories and harbor them and harbor memories is an act of faithfulness in our own lives. Because we tell the good news of Jesus Christ as we tell stories and point to particular places where salvation has occurred. Let that just settle in a little bit. From the beginning, the mission of the church has unfolded in particular places. Though God is infinite and unconfined, God invites human beings into relationship in time and space. Let me say that again. Though God is infinite and unconfined, God invites human beings into relationships in time and space. God's outreach to humanity unfolds in specific places, a strategy that the church is called to imitate as a sign of God's grace in the world. I love that word strategy. It's not very often used when we talk about church, but intentional thinking around where are we all going and how are we going to get there. So for me, a return to physical church, I'm really fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by the dynamics of post-pandemic living. One reason is my career originally was in workplace strategy, and it died an unhappy, ugly death right after COVID because people stopped going to the physical office. And my dear friends, they have not yet gone back. My business partner recently said to me, we were talking about the malaise. Actually, I think NPR called it depriety. So how are we all feeling post-pandemic? It's anxiety and depression all rolled into one. He said, what the pandemic did was give folks permission to design their own life experiences. So just think back on that. I think that's a really easy way to assess the sort of post-pandemic reality that we're in. So as a person that was doing workplace strategy, back 10 years ago, everything was about talking to the C-suite about using your facility to attract and retain workers. Well, the retain worker thing has nothing to do with nothing anymore, right? It's not about retaining. Now it's about attracting and engaging. And the only reason people go to work, there's two C's: collegiality, to be with other people, and collaboration, to actually work together on projects in human-to-human contact. And so I really start thinking about how does that apply to church community, right? It's not altogether unsimilar, but we have to think about what community really looks like. And that's why I brought up those 4 core practices and why I'd like to discuss how this all occurs in time and place, if that makes sense. I believe there are a lot of similarities in these facts. One of the things that's happening in the workplace right now is a focus on community planning, interior planning as a community. This actually happened in 1968 and those years around that. When we talk about office landscape and open plan was first a thing, the democratization of work, yak, we're come full circle again. But now it's about community-based planning. It's not about can I focus here, because most people stay home to focus. Now they go to work to do something else. Similarly, for church, we go there to gather in corporate worship, amongst other things. And so what does that look like? The worth of sacred places. They contribute to the physical fabric of the community. Think about the picture we just showed of your church, how you meld right in with the campus here, obviously. Churches represent the culture and history of the community, kind of a done no-brainer. And then they bring economic vitality to the community. What's really interesting about that is that, let me see, I'm not sure where in my notes this comes up, but I'm going to bring it up now and see if I can come up with it myself. Something like 89% of the humans that use church buildings are not members. It's Girl Scout meetings, it's AA meetings, it's food pantries, the list goes on and on and on. It's a huge percentage. So when you start thinking about that in terms of what a church really means in community, it creates, there's a lot of weight there, right? The church has a huge responsibility. And as Calvinists, we understand that God calls us, all right, to redeem all of society. And so we have this theological imperative as well, I would say. Oh, here it is. That's right here in my notes. I was right on the money. I don't trust myself. You can probably tell I'm tied to my notes, and I apologize for that. My wife can speak extemporaneously for hours and never repeat herself. That's not me, so I apologize for that. This is an interesting picture here. This is a Presbyterian church in Arlington, just outside of Washington. They sold their building. They couldn't keep it going. They sold their building, and they tore it down. But they built this low-cost or affordable housing in its place. And so now they focus. They're still worshiping together, but they're focusing on their legacy being what they did for their local neighbors who needed to have affordable housing. And the undercurrent of loss, I deal with this in my workshops as well at the churches that I work with. The undercurrent of loss is always there, especially for boomers, those of us who are still actively in our worshiping and working in our churches. It's huge. But we have to sort of step aside from that and look at what the future might hold, but also the greater good, the common good. How does God redeem even selling a beloved church building for something that perhaps has greater meaning? That's where we start talking about the gone for good, ? Right? This is a good example of that. Rural churches also play a really significant role in terms of their physicality. They're a central location, they're a public gathering space, and they're commonly rooted in community, right? But let's also look at those who are gathering outside of the gates, who are God's beloved, gathering them together. Ecclesiology, who is outside the gates, just outside the gates, right? We have to look at that. What is the life around you that God cares deeply about? Families with young children, exhausted parents, give them a break and a chance to connect with other tired parents. I think the number one role, just from the work that I've been doing, that churches have is to provide Sabbath for young families. I worked with a church in southern Florida, just outside, it was a Presbyterian church, just outside the Villages. You know about that, right? 55 plus community. They were a church that one of their gifts, like my church, was hospitality. They still had a chef on their staff. And I don't usually try to get churches, I don't give them solutions. I try to get them to think in fresh ways about what they need next, but I couldn't help myself. They have a really successful daycare center where they care for young couples' kids. But they were lamenting the fact that those parents weren't coming to church. And I said, listen, you folks have a huge kitchen, you have a chef, you have people with the resource of time, you have people with a resource of money, you have people who love to cook. Why don't you start by offering Sabbath 2, 3, 5 nights a week to these young families? Make meals to go. You don't have to sign up, you don't have to look at a menu. It's mac and cheese for the kids, it's chicken something or other for the parents. Pick it up and leave. It's there for the taking. And the leftover food, maybe you could find a way to work with a local food pantry or those that are hungry. That's really low-hanging fruit. But think about what that would mean to young families. They're more beleaguered than ever. Time is such a rare commodity for them. It's what's preventing them, in many cases, from coming to church. Artists looking for affordable space to practice their art. Food entrepreneurs looking for affordable kitchens. We have a caterer at our church that uses our kitchen in exchange for giving us meals, making us meals on Sundays and Wednesday nights. Civic groups looking for space to host community meetings. So it's place-based ecclesiology. It's part of the parish movement that we see in the States here. Here's another frame. There's church questions, which is all about building maintenance and programming. Sound familiar? Our church, my church is the oldest, I mentioned this on Sunday, the oldest sanctuary in continuous use in Savannah, and that's saying something. We're not the oldest church, 1800, but we are the oldest sanctuary, 1830. And our maintenance issues are gargantuan, as you might imagine. So church questions, building maintenance and programming. How about the God questions? What are God's dreams for this neighborhood? What does shalom look like here for everyone in the neighborhood, regardless of whether they follow Jesus or not? Here's a little bit more from the Proximity Project. Considering the neighborhood, and I mentioned this earlier, as a source of spiritual formation and imagination. Phyllis Tickle again. An emergent Christian, part of the emergent church movement, is someone who seeks to imagine and reshape traditional Christian practices and understandings, often emphasizing postmodern contexts and engaging with culture in new ways. That's a mouthful, but it's basically a summation of what I've just been talking about, I would say. Emergent Christians are allergic to real estate. I love this line. Because they will say, the minute you own a piece of real estate, then you have to have someone to clean it. Then you have to have somebody to be assured that it gets clean. Then you have to get somebody to be sure it's insured. And the next thing you know, you've got a bishop. But that's kind of how it works, right? It's everything mitigates against looking at things in a more spiritual frame. So let's see if we can find some examples as an antidote to this allergy. I'm going to start with Union Seminary Chapel. Union Seminary Chapel, and we talked about some of these churches that did this, or one church that did this on Sunday, took out all their pews. It's a beautiful Gothic building, and you can begin to see how they're utilizing it in different ways. When you free up space from an axial plan where everybody faces forward, you have to use the center aisle to get from the front to the back, all kinds of amazing things happen. And I'm not suggesting that your church or any other should do this, but I will say that as we look at some of these examples, this provides a really great prototype for ways that smaller churches in particular can rip out the pews and make a huge difference in how their space is utilized and really maximize their real estate for the work of the kingdom, if that makes sense. Here you see some beautiful liturgical examples of different ways of worshiping. That's probably a Taizé service, right, Dave? Over there on the right. And then some art installations, actually cooking some fish for the breakfast. And then here we have sort of sacramental meals taken together in the sanctuary. Again, completely hackable is the way I like to put it. Anybody can do this. Anybody can move the furniture around, set it up in different ways. And then here you have a church service. Now the preacher, in this particular case, this might be a graduation maybe, is on the long side of the axial plan rather than the center of it. The organ pipes are still there, you might notice, and so the organ is still very much with us. We didn't sacrifice the organ. But this is a different way to set it up, and probably a more intimate way for folks to gather in worship, gather around the Word, always around the means of grace, right? Baptism. The holy meal and the preaching of the word. Another picture. St. Gregory of Nyssa Episcopal. We talked briefly about this the other day. Sarah Miles, the author of Take This Bread, was converted by taking the Eucharist. She walked in off the street and boom, all of a sudden she said, I was eating Jesus. It's just that she was an atheist. It's an amazing book. Here's the church. It's very compelling. And of course, it's about place. It's right on the sidewalk, so you can just walk in. It's not car dependent, like most of our churches are. It'd take a lot more courage to drive up to a church and walk in than just to walk in. So proximity is an issue here. But here, these people in line are not waiting for Sunday morning worship. This is for the food bank that Sarah started. Once she started there, she's a foodie and a cook, and she started a food bank. She talks about how the space itself had these dancing saints around the rotunda, and this is a picture of some of them. And there's a picture coming up of the interior. Let me just go ahead and go there. Where she started the food pantry, and she said, I will not do this unless I can put the food on the altar. So it's a sacrament of that present moment, of God's sacrifice, of the way God feeds us, and you can see how it works here. It is now the second largest food pantry in San Francisco. I heard her speak once in Atlanta, and she started her speech with, food justice in my city is protecting the inorganic coffee beans from touching the organic coffee beans. So, I mean, it's a challenge. Look at the values of this church. This just pulled off their website. St. Gregory's Church invites people to see God's image in all humankind, to sing and dance to Jesus' lead, and to become God's friends. One of the things she talks about is they dance to the table. These Episcopalians are amazing. It's a very steady, I think I've actually seen it, maybe you have, Dave, or Brent or Sandra, but so it's not like you have to do a wild disco dance or something. I think it's just a coordinated movement to the altar for taking of communion. It's a beautiful thing. So they actually use that as part of their mission. And then our values. Everyone, without exception, is invited to participate in our worship services fully. By participating in worship, we are transformed from spectators to active makers of community. And we're transformed people, transform the church, and transform the world. Just beautiful language. And here's somebody imitating St. Gregory. But so he's their patron, right? And he wrote that our highest calling is to enter into deep friendship with the divine. It is this conviction that animates our community as we seek to honor ancient Christian practices in ways that feel immediate and accessible in the 21st century. We invite you to join us on this journey. That ancient practicing thing, y'all, is really important. Every priest and pastor I talk to says, because I try to validate some of this stuff in experiential living, is that millennials really do value ancient practices. There's a hunger to go back. There's a hunger for the Nicene Creed. There's a hunger to use ancient practices in new and fresh ways. And that's one of the reasons I included this quote, because that's exactly what St. Gregory's is doing. Church of the Savior. Now, we talked about this little church. I forgot the names of the architects, so here they are again, Donald Brugink and Karl Droppers. Remember we said it looked like a Pizza Hut? What I didn't mention to you is that Jim and I actually did this, went and visited it a week ago. You can see that roof from the highway. It competes with a McDonald's across the street, but you can see it from the highway, which is the whole point. But the other thing I want to talk to you about with this church is that floor plan. The original program in 1967 was just a box with rectangles rotating around a central rectangle. Central rectangle is the worship space, the smaller spaces around were classrooms and offices. This could be any storefront in any strip center in any city of the United States. It's so simple and so clean. And yet, if you include really strong liturgical cues in a completely generic and agnostic space, if you will, suddenly things start to happen. So think about that congregation in Arlington that left their church. They tore it down and built the housing. What if they found a storefront and treated it like this? So Church of the Savior built this 35-foot, I think, communion table, which is at the front of their worship space most of the time. It's got a long bench on both sides of it. You see the baptismal font created from local gypsum, and then the lectern standing on it for the pulpit. So the means of grace are really obvious, but they're completely hackable and movable. Here they are up in the front of the church, and you can see they're projecting, no need for screens, projecting on the wall, traditional church setup. Here they are taking communion around the table. Imagine experiencing communion this way, the Lord's Supper, literally sitting together in community and sharing the elements. And during high holy days, they take it and put it in the middle of the sanctuary. Here you see, it's not. They do take the Advent wreath every Christmas, they've told me, and gather around it, literally gathering around the table. Again, this could be completely generic space. It's just a rectangle that they've treated richly from a liturgical perspective, if that makes sense. And then Mulder Chapel, we talked about this as well on Sunday. I love this example. So this is a 1955 Georgian church. Axial plans, straight pews. I mean, every church, this looks exactly like my church, the interior of my church. This is the seminary chapel for the RCA Seminary, Western Theological Seminary in Holland. And here's what they did. Right? They completely gutted the interior, but they added back in really significant architectural details that really highlight liturgical practices and go really deep around visual cues for liturgical meaning. I bring this up again just because this is, just like the church we just not looked at, Church of the Servant, a hackable space. Any suburban American church could do this with some intentionality. This can then become a concert space. It can be a formal wedding space up there on the left. These are kind of their default arrangements. If you had to sell your church building to a local like-minded nonprofit and they leased it back to you, imagine ways that you could take this space when you probably would use it on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights. It becomes your space again when you bring the liturgical pieces back in. So it's just one way to partner around saving church place, maybe without still owning your building even. And here's some examples of the use, right? There's the formal wedding and the lecture setup and so on and so forth. My own church, I use language about how we might, in terms of our relationship with the neighborhood, extend our narthex into the square. Oh my gosh, I gotta wrap up. Sorry. And so here we are doing our Palm Sunday. And then finally, this from the Proximity Project, Redemptive Spaces. Kids at this church in Minnesota actually write Bible verses on the sidewalk. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's for the community, right? What if you created an interactive community mural Like, where are you from? We could do that. We have 17 million tourists a year. Let's do something that engages the tourists. I'm a docent at my church. That gets me really excited. Plant a community garden. Open your playground to the community. Host a local food truck. Build a small outdoor patio. Plan a bike to church day to encourage congregants to explore the neighborhood by bike and have a valet, for heaven's sakes. Just really easy things to do. And then finally, I want to tell you about a church in my community. Church of St. Michael's and All Saints was an Episcopal church, 1950s building on the corner near my house, and now it's a church of the Epiphany. The Episcopalians have done a church plant here. This is the front door to it, and there's a little hint about what's going on. You can see a luxury vinyl floor, what's going on with that, with some of the old accoutrement, but it looks like this now. They completely gutted it, painted everything bright white, and here's the worship space. I stumbled on this by mistake, by the way. It's the way God works. It's like, wait, this actually is happening in places near my house. And the priest tells me that they're pushing the practices, the liturgical practices of the Episcopal Church to their utter and utmost limits, but they're doing it. They're focused on LGBTQ, focused on transgender. They have Christmas Eve at the Wormhole, which I can attest to you is a biker's bar because I've been there twice. My niece is a folk singer and she performed there. And he said, you just haven't had Christmas Eve until you see bikers weeping into their beers over Christmas. It's just amazing. He does Ashes to Go, Father Michael. By the way, Father Michael is a teacher in film and TV at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design. That's a whole other story. But he's also the priest for this church. Ashes to Go stands out in front of the coffee shop on Wednesday. Anybody that wants it gets ashes on their forehead. Little things. And their church is growing. They right now have 40 gathered in worship, including the 80-year-old members that were deeply wounded by the closing of their church. They're coming now to this church and understanding that there are new ways to do church and to be together in Christian community. Theater. It can be used for all kinds of different things. And you'll be happy to know this is my final slide. There's a guy named Bruce Kwan who is a member of this organization called the Gospel Coalition. And he says that we need to rebuild our embrace of buildings. Again, sounds counterintuitive, right, as churches are dying. Find the capital, he says. Preserve our churches. Recommit ourselves to biblical vision, so on and so forth. The practice of the Catholicity of the church. Finding friends through ecclesial unity. All those kinds of things. And then I want to close with this incredibly rich quote, again from Stephen Bauman, who is the senior pastor at Christ Church Methodist in Manhattan. He says this, "It's a very big deal. We all sense it. The power of the gospel has been suffering the death of 1,000 cuts. Yet, we can also sense incipient resurrection. After all, God's primary business is bringing life out of death. This is the very heart of our faith. Our moment is rife with the opportunity for the church to reclaim this holy agenda. It begins with the death of institutional self-preservation and navel-gazing. It begins with a prophetic call to justice, righteousness, and peace while walking humbly with God. The church will embody God's revelation, that all peoples and persons fall within the bounds of God's love, no one excluded, that wealth is not a marker of God's special favor, and that all deserve to share God's bounty, that the earth, God's first testament, has been ravished by humanity and cries out for healing, that those who share the mind of Christ set their sights on the things above, where Christ dwells. That integrity, mercy, kindness, and forgiveness are the building blocks of the healthy community, that citizenship in God's sovereign realm trumps all other citizenships, and that faith, hope, and love abide, and the greatest of these is love. It's exciting to consider," he says, "despite the very hard work and institutional pain ahead, the opportunities this moment presents for the Christian church are nothing short of awesome." So, thank you. I don't really know if we have time, but I'm happy to have a little discussion time, questions, if anybody has something that's on their hearts or burning a hole in their minds or something that we could talk about.
I wonder, because I think the same thing is occurring in Europe, and a lot of reasons people go to Europe is to visit these beautiful structures, historic and significant architectural structures. How is that compared to what's happening in the United States? How are they keep maintaining their buildings?
I don't know how they maintain them. That's a really good question. They're about 50 years ahead of us, I think, in this whole trend. Because those of you who travel to Europe often know that most of those churches are empty all the time, right? It's a pretty rare church that has active Sunday worship and that sort of thing. I don't know how, whether it's civic organizations that are maintaining them. It's a really good question. And some of them, like the Netherlands, most of the Protestant churches have been converted into theaters and pubs, and I mean, it's probably 50-50 now. If you see a church building, whether it's a church or not. But I don't have an answer for how they get maintained. I don't really know.
Sorry. So what evidence do they have that this is in fact increasing their numbers? And I don't mean numbers in a way that's what our goal is, to count people, but in terms of people coming to join in as community in worship and in a Christian way. Has this seen?
What was it?
Has this resulted in an actual increase?
There are counter trends that are happening, and I'll give you an example. There's several examples in Savannah. They tend to be fairly large, conservative churches are booming. The Anglican Church in Atlanta, young families coming out of their ears. Independent Presbyterian Church, which is truly independent, doesn't belong to any denominational Presbyterian flavor, booming. I mean, that's like watching a Norman Rockwell painting in 3D every Sunday morning. There's little whole families walking together with strollers, and it's like, what? It's an anomaly, but they're booming. Right next door is a progressive church called First Baptist Church that's having difficulty attracting young families. Part of that's proximity, because we're in the middle of the historic district, and by the way, all the townhomes around us, these gorgeous townhomes, usually sell for between 3 and 5 million, and 70% of them are owned by corporations. So for us, hospitality may be our gift, but who is our neighbor, right? And so there's all these dynamics around how to attract and engage young families. Now, we have several young families who love our little rituals. I mean, little kids walking behind a donkey on Palm Sunday is one of those things that young families come back for. But also churches need to be intentional about how they care for the families once they come. So there's layers of intentionality, I think, around how you build community. And different models too. It's not just young families. We talked about how the church model now is set up for the family unit, but that's not necessarily who's coming to church, right? So what do we do with those who are not partnered or who don't have part of a nuclear family and that sort of thing? So to me, it's about place, but it's also about theology. It's also about how we interpret God's call on us to be redemptive in our approach to how we do church. If that makes any sense.
Do your statistics include the Catholic Church?
That's a really good question, and not so much. The mainline Protestant church is the one I think that's deteriorating a lot faster. I don't have statistics on Catholic churches. I'd like to kind of dig into that. That's a good question. My brother was sharing with me a story of someone he knows who grew up in the Catholic Church and isn't anymore. There's a lot of that because the church has let people down so strongly. But I don't have stats on it, I'm sorry to say.
St. Mary's on campus has 4 or 5 masses on Sunday.
That's what.
What'd you say? We have what on Sunday?
It's a student parish.
Yeah.
But they have both Spanish and
Yeah.
early, middle, late family.
Yeah, nice. That's pretty rare.
Speaking of Catholics, a little off topic, but Vatican Conclave chooses first American-born Pope.
Oh,
Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, 69, is originally from Chicago and has chosen the papal name of Leo XIV.
Exciting. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Very good. Well, unless anyone else has a burning question, I've kept you past the time, and I apologize for that. I thank you for your attention today, and it's just been a joy to be with you all. So thank you very much.